Evelyn Hart had always hated dolls, but when she and her younger brother Marcus found an abandoned one lying in the weeds outside their new home, neither of them could explain why they carried it inside instead of leaving it behind. Its porcelain face was cracked in a way that made it look like it was grinning, and one glass eye seemed to shimmer as if alive. From the moment Evelyn placed it on the shelf in her room, she swore she could hear the faint scrape of tiny footsteps in the dark, moving when no one was watching. When I first saw the doll, it was sitting in the far corner of my grandmother's attic, half hidden behind a stack of dusty boxes. At first I thought it was just another forgotten toy, something left behind from years of children and grandchildren passing through her house. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. Its porcelain face was cracked, fine lines running across the cheeks like veins beneath pale skin. One glass eye was perfect, a pale cold blue that seemed to shimmer even in the dim attic light. The other eye, though, was loose, drooping in its socket, almost as if it were trying to follow me when I moved. The sight made me stop breathing for a moment. The attic always smelled of mothballs, mildew, and dust, with a hint of something sour in the wood that had been there for generations. It was the kind of place that felt heavy with silence, as though the house itself was listening. I should have left, gone back downstairs, but I couldn't stop staring at the doll. Its dress was once blue, though now faded to a dull gray, fraying at the edges as if it had been chewed. Its hands were small and detailed, each tiny porcelain finger curled inward. The head was tilted slightly, not in a natural way but at an angle that looked broken, as though it had been forced to watch whoever stood at the entrance to the attic. I crouched closer, though every instinct told me not to. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, a steady warning I ignored. Dust clung to my skin as I reached out, hesitating before letting my finger brush across its cheek. For the briefest second I thought I felt warmth beneath the porcelain, as though a faint pulse beat inside it. My hand shot back, and I whispered to myself that it was only my imagination. The heat of the attic, the stillness of the air, and my own nerves had tricked me. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had touched something alive. I left the doll where it sat, but I couldn't get rid of the thought of it. As I climbed down the creaking stairs, I kept glancing back, half expecting it to be standing at the top, watching me. When I finally stepped into the hallway, I shut the attic door and locked it, though no one ever locked that door before. My grandmother never said a word about the attic or the doll inside, and I wondered if she even knew it was there. That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, every sound of the house amplified in the dark. The groan of pipes, the whisper of branches scraping against the window, the faint shifting of wood, all of it sounded alive, crawling into my ears. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that cracked face staring at me, the loose eye trembling like it wanted to fall free. The silence of my room pressed down heavy on me, broken only by a sound I couldn't explain. A faint scrape beneath the floorboards, slow, uneven, as if something small was crawling around just under the bed. I told myself it was rats. Old houses had them, after all. I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than that, but then the noise stopped, and the silence grew sharper. So sharp it hurt. My heart raced, sweat clinging to my neck. I forced myself to sit up, and with trembling hands I turned on the lamp. That's when I saw it. My throat tightened, and every bit of breath was sucked from my lungs. The doll, the very same doll I had seen in the attic, the one I had left behind, was sitting in the corner of my bedroom. Its cracked porcelain face reflected the light, its head tilted even farther than before. The loose glass eye dangled lower now, swaying gently as if moved by something unseen. Its dress was no longer coated in attic dust but clean, as though it had been waiting for me all along. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I could only sit frozen in my bed, staring into that one unblinking eye, while something deep inside me whispered that I had brought it down with me somehow. Or worse, maybe it had always been waiting here, and I had only just now noticed it. The doll's tilted head seemed to lean farther as I watched, and the shadows stretched long across the walls. I forced myself to blink, and for a moment I prayed that when I opened my eyes it would be gone. But when I looked again, it was still there, closer than before, its porcelain fingers resting against the floor, as though it had crawled toward me in the silence. I didn't tell anyone about the doll. A part of me was afraid of sounding crazy, but another part feared that speaking about it aloud would somehow make it stronger, more real. Instead, I dragged the doll back into the attic the following morning, holding it at arm's length as if it might burn me. Its porcelain skin felt colder than before, the cracks on its face sharper, deeper. I shoved it into an old wooden trunk, the kind with rusted hinges and a lock that no longer worked, and slammed the lid shut so hard the sound echoed through the attic beams. I stacked boxes on top of its old clothes, forgotten books, anything heavy enough to weigh it down. My chest heaved as though I had just run miles, but I told myself it was over. All day I walked through the house trying to shake the thought of it. My grandmother's home had always been quiet, but now every silence felt sinister. The tick of the old clock in the hallway was too loud, the groan of the floorboards beneath my feet too sharp. I kept glancing at doors, expecting to see something move behind them. Every window reflected my own nervous face back at me, pale and damp with sweat. The house didn't feel like the place I had known for years. It felt hollow, as though it had been emptied of everything except me and whatever else had crept in. That night I stayed awake, determined to keep watch. My lamp stayed on, flooding the room with weak yellow light. I kept my eyes fixed on the corner where the doll had appeared, daring it to return. Hours passed. The shadows stretched long, bending into strange shapes, but nothing moved. Eventually, exhaustion won, and my head sank into the pillow. When I woke, the light of morning streamed across the floor, and for a brief moment, I almost laughed at myself. The corner was empty. The room looked ordinary again, and the dread of the night before felt foolish in daylight. I pushed myself out of bed and walked into the hall, rubbing my eyes, when something caught my attention. There, etched faintly into the wooden floor, were scuff marks, tiny uneven lines that trailed down the hall, turning sharply toward the attic stairs. I crouched down, heart pounding, tracing them with my fingertips. They looked like drag marks, as if something small had shuffled or scraped its way across the floor during the night. My throat went dry. I told myself I had to check. No matter how much I didn't want to, I needed to see that the doll was still trapped in the trunk. My legs trembled as I climbed the attic stairs. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the musty air pressed against me, thicker than before. I forced myself toward the trunk, my fingers clawing at the boxes I had stacked on top. Dust clouded into the air, stinging my eyes, but I pushed through it. When I yanked the lid open, my breath caught. The trunk was empty. I stumbled backward, my body crashing into an old rocking chair that lurched into motion, creaking in slow, uneven arcs. My hands shook so badly I nearly fell. The doll was gone. I scrambled around the attic, throwing open boxes, pulling aside old curtains, searching every dark corner. But there was nothing. No doll, no sign of it. Only silence. I backed down the stairs, my chest aching with every heartbeat. The air in the hallway felt heavier, as though the house itself knew what I had seen. I locked the attic door again, my hands trembling so violently that the key nearly slipped from my fingers. The silence followed me into every room. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, refusing to close my eyes. Hours dragged by in silence until the sound came. A creak, long and drawn out, coming from above me. The attic floor shifted, groaned, and then settled. My stomach turned as I listened. Then came another sound, slower this time, wood scraping against wood. The rocking chair. It creaked back and forth, the steady rhythm echoing through the ceiling, louder with every sway, back and forth. Back and forth. My pulse hammered in my ears. I buried my head under the blanket, though I knew it offered no protection. The chair rocked for what felt like forever, its sound a lullaby from something that should not exist. When it finally stopped, the silence was worse. I lay there with my eyes wide open, knowing without doubt that the doll was no longer contained. It had chosen to sit above me in the dark, waiting for me to fall asleep. The days that followed blurred together, each one heavier than the last. I barely slept, and when I did, the dreams were fractured and cruel. In them, I wandered endless hallways where the doll's loose glass eye glimmered from the shadows. Always ahead of me, always watching. I woke drenched in sweat, gasping, my sheets twisted around me, as though I had been fighting something in my sleep. Every time I looked in the mirror, I seemed paler, weaker, like the house itself was draining me. I avoided the attic, but it didn't matter anymore. The doll wasn't trapped there, and it seemed to move as it pleased, appearing in places it had no right to be. One evening I walked into the kitchen, and there it was, sitting upright in a chair at the table. Its cracked porcelain head was tilted, its loose eye swaying as if it was about to fall but never did. The fading blue dress was different this time. Darker patches stained the fabric. My stomach turned as I realized they looked like dried blood, blotches that hadn't been there before. For a long moment I couldn't move. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at it while a cold shiver crawled over my skin. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. Finally I forced myself forward. I grabbed the doll with shaking hands, holding it away from me like a filthy rag. The porcelain felt colder than ice, the weight heavier than it should have been. I shoved it into a black garbage bag, tying the top in frantic knots until my fingers ached. I carried it outside, across the yard to the trash bins at the far edge of the property. The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that made every sound echo: my footsteps on the gravel, the creak of the bin lid, the thud of the bag landing inside. I slammed the lid and pressed my hands against it, as if to keep the doll from climbing out. My heart thundered in my chest as I whispered to myself that it was over. I left it there in the dark and forced myself back into the house. For the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. That night, I lay in bed, convinced I had one. I told myself the morning would come, and the doll would be gone forever, carried away with the trash. I drifted into uneasy sleep, clinging to that fragile hope. But when I woke, it was waiting for me. The bag was gone, shredded to ribbons, black plastic scattered across the floor like torn skin. And sitting at the foot of my bed was the doll, as pristine as ever, though its head was tilted so far now that its chin nearly touched its chest. Its glass eye dangled by a thread, still attached, still moving, swaying like a pendulum that marked the passing of my sanity. I sat frozen, my breath shallow and quick. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, but even daylight couldn't make it seem harmless. It looked worse than ever, wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The shadows clung to it, bending around its shape, making the corners of the room darker. I could almost feel its gaze, even though its eyes didn't move. I didn't touch it this time. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there all day, watching it, waiting for it to move. It didn't. It just sat silently, the weight of its presence heavier than stone. Hours crawled by, and the room grew darker until the sun finally dipped below the horizon. The air thickened with shadows, and my chest grew tight. As the last sliver of daylight vanished, I realized something I had been too afraid to admit before. It wasn't just that I was watching the doll, it was that the doll was watching me. Its presence filled the room, its silence more oppressive than any scream. The more I stared, the more I was convinced it wasn't simply an object, it was aware. Patient, waiting for something I couldn't understand. When the room was fully swallowed by night, I finally turned on the lamp. The light flickered once before holding steady, and in that moment, I thought I saw the doll's loose eye twitch. Not just swaying, not just dangling, but twitching, as though something inside it was trying to break free. My stomach dropped, and every part of me screamed to run, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. And deep down, I knew it wasn't trapped in this house with me anymore. It was the other way around. I was trapped here with it. I wanted to leave the house. Every fiber of my being told me to pack a bag, run out the front door, and never come back. But some unseen weight pressed me down, something that made my chest feel heavy and my thoughts sluggish. I couldn't make myself step outside. The fear was real, yes, but there was also something else, something like curiosity, or maybe a terrible pull that came from the doll itself. I needed to know why it kept returning, why it seemed to want me. The thought made me sick, but it was the truth. That night, instead of running, I set up a camera. I positioned it directly across from my bed, the lens aimed at the spot where the doll had appeared before. I told myself that if I had evidence, if I could capture even one movement, it would make me feel less insane. I could prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it. My hands shook as I pressed the record button, the red light blinking in the dim room. I left the lamp on, the same weak yellow glow that had become my only comfort. The doll sat silently at the foot of my bed, waiting. I lay back, my body tense, every muscle stiff with fear. I forced my eyes shut, though I didn't dare fall into real sleep. My heart beat so loudly I was certain it would give me away. For what felt like hours, nothing happened. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy enough to smother me. My eyelids began to burn from the strain of keeping them shut. I almost convinced myself the doll would never move as long as I was watching, that it thrived only in darkness or weakness. But then I heard it, the faintest scrape. I kept my breathing slow and steady, pretending to sleep, though inside my chest, my heart was a wild animal. The scrape came again, closer this time. My skin prickled as the sound of porcelain against fabric filled the room. I wanted to open my eyes, to see, but I couldn't. I thought if I revealed myself, if I let it know I was awake, it would attack. The mattress dipped slightly beneath me. The weight of something cold, hard, and impossibly heavy pressed down at the edge of the bed. My fingers twitched under the blanket, aching to reach for the lamp, but I stayed frozen. The sound of grinding porcelain was inches away now, slow and deliberate. Then I felt it, a faint pressure on my leg, as though small rigid hands were gripping the blanket. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I thought my lungs would burst. The weight shifted, dragging upward. My chest tightened as the pressure grew heavier, crawling onto me piece by piece. It was climbing. The mattress groaned under the strange, unnatural weight as it moved higher. My skin crawled with the icy presence of it, and I fought the urge to scream. Then the pressure settled fully onto my chest. My body felt pinned, crushed beneath something that should not have been strong enough to hold me down. The air in the room thickened until every inhale was a battle. I forced my eyes open for just a second. What I saw made my blood run cold. The doll's cracked porcelain face hovered above mine, so close I could see the jagged edges of the broken cheek. Its dangling eye swayed in the lamplight, twitching like something alive inside. Its head tilted further, almost unnaturally backward, and I could hear the faint grind of porcelain cracking as it moved. The weight pressed harder into my chest, and the room began to blur at the edges. My vision swam, dark spots spreading across everything. I wanted to push it off, but my limbs wouldn't move. My body refused me, as though the doll had stolen not just my strength but my will. The last thing I felt before the world slipped away was the icy touch of porcelain fingers brushing against my cheek, leaving behind a burning cold that seeped into my skin. Then everything went black, swallowed by silence. When I woke, sunlight was streaming into the room. I gasped, clutching at my chest, but there was nothing there. The doll was gone. The room looked ordinary again, though the blanket was twisted tightly around me, as if something had wound it into knots while I slept. I turned toward the camera, desperate for answers, for proof of what had happened. The red light was still on. The footage was still recording. My stomach tightened with dread as I reached out, knowing that whatever I would see could either save my sanity or destroy it completely. When I finally stopped shaking long enough to turn off the camera, my hands felt clammy and weak. The small screen flickered as I rewound the footage, my heart hammering so violently it hurt. At first the recording showed nothing but me lying in bed, stiff beneath the covers. The doll sat at the foot of the mattress, motionless, its cracked porcelain face catching the yellow lamplight. Minutes crawled by in silence. I almost thought the recording would prove nothing. Then it started. The doll's head twitched. It was subtle at first, like a glitch in the frame, but the movement was real. Its dangling glass eyes swung slightly as its hand scraped forward across the blanket. My stomach churned as I watched its porcelain fingers clutch the fabric, pulling itself inch by inch toward me. The camera captured everything: the unnatural crawl, the jerking motions, the way its body seemed to stiff for life yet somehow alive enough to move. I couldn't breathe as I watched the moment when it climbed onto the bed. The camera showed the mattress tip, my chest rising faster as I fought to keep still. Then it crawled over me, straddling my body. I stared at the screen as its cracked face hovered inches from mine, the loose eye trembling as though it were ready to burst. Then, without warning, the video cut to static. The image vanished in a blur of gray and black lines. The sound replaced by a sharp hiss that made my ears ache. No matter how much I fast-forwarded, the feed never returned. I had no proof of what happened after that point. The screen froze on static, and I was left staring at my reflection in the glass, pale and hollow-eyed. I shut the camera off and dropped it onto the bed. The house was silent, but the silence wasn't comforting. It pressed against me, thick and suffocating. I stumbled to my feet and searched every room, throwing open doors, scanning corners, whispering under my breath for the doll to reveal itself. The attic was empty, the kitchen bare, the hallways long and cold. There was nothing, no sign of it. For the first time in days, I thought maybe it was over. But the relief was thin, fragile. It cracked the moment I tried to rest. That night, I lay in bed with the lamp still on, my eyes darting across the room, refusing to close. The corners seemed darker than usual, stretching longer, deeper. The shadows felt alive. Hours passed, and I heard nothing, saw nothing. Slowly, exhaustion wrapped around me, dragging me down. My eyelids grew heavy, and before I could stop myself, I drifted into half-sleep. That was when I felt it. Something cold brushed against my cheek, so faint I thought it might be the edge of a dream. But when I forced my eyes open, the room was pitch black. My lamp was off, though I hadn't touched it. My body tensed, every nerve screaming. I tried to move, to reach for the switch, but I couldn't. My arms lay heavy at my sides, my legs unresponsive. It was as if invisible hands had pinned me in place. The darkness was absolute. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and rapid, and beneath it, a faint cracking sound, porcelain against wood, porcelain against fabric. It was right beside me. I could feel it there, though I couldn't see. The weight pressed lightly against the edge of the mattress. Shifting closer, I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My throat felt locked, sealed shut. My vision blurred as panic overtook me, and in the thick silence, the cracking sound grew louder, sharper. It was inches from my ear now, the noise of something breaking, splintering, reforming. I turned my head as much as I could, straining against the paralysis. Nothing. The space beside me was empty, but the sound hadn't stopped. It echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the room until I thought my skull would split from the noise. Then, as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. I lay there, frozen, my chest heaving, my body still pinned. For a few precious seconds, there was only silence. Then I felt it again, the brush of something cold, porcelain fingers grazing my skin. My eyes watered, my body trembling with the effort to break free, but I couldn't move. The darkness seemed to lean closer, swallowing everything, and then, nothing. When I woke, the sunlight filled the room, but my body felt hollow, drained. The doll was nowhere to be found. There were no tracks, no scuff marks, no shredded plastic. It had vanished as though it had never been there at all. But the cold sensation on my cheek remained, lingering like a bruise beneath the skin. I checked the camera again, desperate for answers. The screen flickered to life, but the memory card was blank. Every file had been erased. My stomach dropped as the realization sank in. I was no longer the one keeping watch. Whatever it was, whatever lived inside that doll had been watching me all along. And though the doll itself was gone, I knew deep in my bones it hadn't left. It was still here, somewhere in the shadows, waiting for me to close my eyes again.